Walkability. If the only effort for walkability is to place sidewalks parallel to the edge of the street per regulatory minimums, it's not enough. If the development street pattern is maze-like, which a lot of subdivisions tend to be, even with miles of walks, the development is unwalkable. You might think I'm going to promote the grid. No, absolutely not. I live in St. Louis Park, Minnesota, an older grid neighborhood. While I can walk directly to Cedar Lake Park, the two restaurants within walkable distance, as the crows flies, are not actually walkable because of the grid. I'd be forced to walk half a mile or 2/3 of a mile extra distance because of the grid, so I drive to them. In addition, most streets have walks both sides of the street, and those walks are just 4 foot wide. Most people actually walk in the streets, not the walks. Why? Because the standard 4 foot width is not enough for a couple to walk side by side, so they just use the street instead. So how do we create walkable neighborhoods? First, you must think differently. Historically, walks have always been the byproduct of street design.
That was how it began, or should I say ended. I was hurrying home to my wife and kids, and I guess I didn't look too closely when I crossed the intersection. But then Joe Smith, who was driving the car, wasn't on his toes either. He was thinking about that big deal at the office. It hurt pretty bad at first, but that soon passed. It was a lot tougher on my wife and kids and on Joe Smith and his family. Well, anyway, I am an ex-pedestrian now. I'm one of that not-so-exclusive group of 34,000 people who are killed each year by automobiles. Over 1 million more are injured in Maine.
The vehicular and the pedestrian systems should be thought of as two independent systems. At the initial design process, the planners should design the main trails first, essentially creating a pedestrian highway system. The larger the development, the more important the system becomes. These main trails should be wider and lead to an existing or proposed destinations, some of which we mentioned in earlier sessions and some in those to come. The planner should then design the neighborhood around those trails. On flat land, having linear or straight trails can be tree-lined so that they form an architectural element as the development ages, while providing a shaded stroll during the warm summer months. On rolling land, the main trail should avoid steep slopes that would require excessive effort for a stroll. Walk width should be dictated by the pedestrian volume, not by some one-size-fits-all minimum regulatory width. Higher volume walks leading to the main trail should be 5 to 6 foot wide, and those that just serve a few homes can be 3 to 4 foot wide. Our design methods deliver far more space along both front and rear homes than conventional methods. We use that space to meander the sidewalks along the street, creating an elegance that walks parallel to the curb cannot replicate. As the walks extend beyond the right-of-way, they are set in public access easements that can also be used to reduce utility main lengths in some situations. Meandering walks should be graceful, not jiggly, spastic walks that will destroy both function and marketability. Now let's talk about safer and more beautiful walkable neighborhoods. At a street intersection where drivers are looking out not to hit other drivers, and when there are multiple cars approaching, the average human will interpret those cars as possible threats. That same person will be able to concentrate on only 4 to 5 threats. What this translates to is that if a driver's at an intersection and there are multiple cars approaching, that driver will not notice that person or child also entering the intersection. And where do we place all those pedestrian crossings? Yep, right at every corner of every intersection curve, the most dangerous place possible. This is also why the worst possible place to have a pedestrian crossing is at a roundabout or traffic circle, a really bad idea. If the walks have room to meander, the walk crossing should be pulled away from the intersection, more than likely being a safer location. Meandering walks accomplish that. Walks can be used instead of streets for emergency connections. For fire and police circulation access, why build excessive streets when a wide walk will do just fine? Of course, that walk would need to be built to handle the weight of the vehicles, but it's still far more efficient to use walks as an alternate emergency route. In cases where cul-de-sacs exceed maximum allowed length, just add an emergency walk to the end of it, to another street, and then the length issues should be no factor. Now that pedestrian traffic is directed to more functional and attractive systems, what happens when higher traffic pedestrians cross higher traffic streets? Diffusers. A diffuser is something we often use instead of roundabouts to maintain flow on the higher traffic streets while serving the function of a roundabout, and is used when a local street of higher traffic crosses a trail. The vehicle still maintains flow when no pedestrian is present, but the island and landscaping in front of the driver catches their attention where it's needed most. The pedestrian crosses at one-way lanes, which is much safer.
If you walk along roads or highways where there are no sidewalks, walk facing the flow of traffic so that you may see an approaching car and step off the roadway. Never walk with your back to approaching traffic. You might be hit or cause a car to swerve, causing a bad accident. You, the driver, must constantly be on the alert and not exceed a safe rate of speed. You are driving along at 30 miles an hour. Suddenly a child runs out 90 feet in front of you. She's paralyzed with fright. You slam on your brakes and come to a halt just 7 feet from the child. But if you were going just 5 miles an hour faster, you would have traveled 30 feet farther. You would have struck the child and traveled 20 feet beyond. Fatalities among older people are high due to their slower reactions and their misjudging of distances traveled by vehicles.
Keep in mind when the lessons learned in these sessions can reduce street length from 5 to over 50%, funds that would have gone into infrastructure could be applied to increase convenience and safety elements. All of these methods require more effort than a simple button press or entry on automated CAD subdivision design software. They require the land planner to have a passion for the people living in the neighborhoods they are getting paid to design. The land surveyors and engineers need to embrace the fact that these new design methods require more complexity to their plans and plats. And cities need to understand that the regulations of the past no longer function if they want better growth. In the end, walkability requires all stakeholders to think differently.
That reminds me that my time is about up. But before I go, I thought you might like to know what happened to Joe Smith, the driver of the car that ran me down. Well, the court awarded my wife $50,000. Of course, Joe hasn't got that kind of money, so he'll have to pay some each month for a long, long time. It's tough. He has a family of his own, too. Well, I'll be seeing you.